Welcome to From Rome Info Video. My name is Brother Alexis Buniello, and this is the documentary series on Pope Benedict's renunciation, the facts, the laws, and the consequences. I've decided to make this video, even though I've written extensively on this topic, because I'm finding that most people don't read and they prefer to watch videos. So this will try to put it all in video format, the essential arguments, but also the more broader view that may not dawn on people reading individual articles. My expertise to speak on this topic comes from the fact that I've studied at 3 pontifical universities, a graduate minor seminary, and I have spent 12 years in personal research in scholastic theology, translating Bonaventure's commentary on the Book of Sentences. The first volume is published. You can see it at fromrome.info on the left bar there. If you'd like a copy, it's 1,000 pages long. That's equivalent to 3,000 letter-sized pages of Latin translation. And it's generally accepted by scholars to be an authoritative English translation. It's the first complete English translation of Bonaventure's treatise on the Trinity, and that's only the first of 3 volumes. I've already translated the other 2. They just haven't been typeset and published, and I've begun the 4th. Scholastic theology really qualifies you to think, because following the methods of the doctors and fathers of the church, and in the footsteps of Peter Lombard and the great philosophers of age like Peter Abelard, the Catholic Church developed a method for studying theologic or philosophical or even literary texts and analyzing their meaning and understanding them correctly and objectively. And all this was accomplished before the rise of all the modern errors that affect these things, which began with Descartes breaking from the Christian tradition and attempting to do philosophy on his own as if he was some kind of enlightened being while he was sitting on a hot stove during a French war trying to avoid battle. And so a lot of the fundamental problem with the renunciation of Benedict is in understanding what it is. The facts are there for everyone to see, but a lot of people can't see it, and a lot of people don't want to see it. So first, in this first short video, I want to discuss objective reality. The first objective reality is that God exists and that Jesus Christ is God. He proved he was God by his miracles and by rising from the dead. The second is that he founded an institution that will exist until the end of time, always teaching the same doctrine, and that is the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, to protect it from error, he gave it a wonderful and unique office called the Office of St. Peter, which was passed down by Peter to the Church of Rome as its inheritance and is held by the bishops of Rome in apostolic succession. Now, the Catholic Church is founded on truth. Christ is truth, God is truth, but also the truth what Christ taught and passed down through the apostles, and which the apostles taught. And in the Roman Church, the Catholics throughout the ages have taken and reworked Roman law into a body of laws for the Church that explains how everything should to be done, when it's done, and when it's not done. And that's called canon law. Pope Pius X began a collection of canon law in a code, following the tradition begun by Napoleon, who revived the classical idea of a code of law, which we find in the great Roman Emperor Justinian, and forms the basis of all Western law, Justinian's code. And so he codified canon law in 1917. It's called the Pio Benedictine Code because it was completed by Pope Benedict XV. And after the Second Vatican Council, there was a lot of calls to revise that code and bring it in accord with the so-called reforms of Vatican II. I won't get into their merit. And so John Paul II in 1983 published a new code of canon law, And I have a copy in the Italian Latin here by Monsignor Arieta. He wasn't Monsignor when he was editor of it. And these are the laws of the Roman Church. And the only official text is the Latin. So you don't have to know Latin to understand what I'm going to talk about in this series. However, if you don't know Latin, you're going to be severely hampered in making any kind of judgment that's worth being listened to by anyone else. So there are a lot of canonists out there who have degrees in canon law, and I do not doubt understand or think they understand the law very well. But if they don't know Latin, they can't possibly understand it, okay? And if they don't actually follow the law, they may not want to understand it. So you have to understand that the laws are what the church puts out. And here's canon law, so these are the laws. But what someone says the law means may not be correct, because just as in a legal dispute in any court of any kind, criminal or civil, the lawyers for one side are going to argue for their side, and the lawyers for the other are going to argue for theirs. And it is a rare lawyer whose honesty is such that he doesn't try to fudge something or make something look more than what it is, like I say. There are a lot of dishonest lawyers. As a matter of one Franciscan saint who was a lawyer, he became, I think it was St. John Capistrano. He was walking down the street in northern Italy one day, and he saw a swineherd trying to get the swine into the fold, into the pen where they're supposed to go, and they wouldn't go. And finally he swore, "Get into that pen like lawyers into hell." And at that, all the swine ran right in. And the saint took this as a warning from God that he should give up the legal profession, became a friar, and he did become a friar and a great saint, John of Capistrano. And that's because most lawyers do go to hell because they're liars, and they think that they can lie for their client, and that they're not committing a grave sin, and they are. Okay. So the same thing with any legal dispute in the church. Just because someone has a degree in law doesn't mean he's going to tell you what the law means. Okay. And generally speaking, one of the chief problems we have in modern times is that though we should always defer to experts who have academic degrees in an argument, a lot of experts today are willing to lie and do lie and make up all kinds of absurd things like global warming and things like that just don't exist. And because they have an agenda and they're worried about their salaries, or they belong to political parties. And alas, the same thing is true in the church, because the church is not a house of angels who are perfect. It is a hospital for sinners, and many of them are far from perfect, and some of them are actually criminal. And we can have criminal conspiracies in the church, just as we have in the state or in civil society or in our local towns. None of that changes the fact that the church is true, because the church is out to save us. It's like the medicine to cure us, and the fact that there's sick people in it shouldn't scandalize us. That's what they're supposed to be in the church for, to be cured, and hopefully they'll want to be. So that's something about the nature of the church laws. Now, in the Catholic Church, the laws actually are not recommendations. They are, in fact, laws. If you do something in violation of the law, you can or will be punished. If you do something that's not in accord with law, you can't claim it as legal value. This is just common sense, even in civil society, and anyone who's mature understands that. So when we come to the question of Pope Benedict's act on February 11th, 2013, we have to keep in mind that there might be a lot of groups that want it to appear what it's not, or be what it isn't, because they want something as a consequence. And the sad truth is that Pope Benedict was not elected in the conclave of 2005 because he's what everyone wanted. He's just what was considered better than what was being proposed. Cardinal Martini, his faction was putting up Jorge Mario Bergoglio, and they explained what his agenda would be, which we can see now what it is. And the cardinals were aghast and said, we have to elect someone else who will keep the pastoral approach of John Paul II. that many considered a holy man. And so, of course, they elected his right-hand man, Joseph Ratzinger, who took the name Benedict XVI. So, with that kind of political foundation to his pontificate, he really didn't have much authority. We have to understand that though the church is founded by Christ, the Pope is elected by a club of men called the College of Cardinals. And this wasn't the way in the beginning, but down through the centuries, one thing has led to another, and this is what comes about. And like any male club, I have a degree in anthropology, so I think I'm qualified to talk about the human aspect too. In any male club, it's don't rock the boat, and our interests are why we act. So the general objectives of the College of Cardinals is to keep Vatican a nice little comfy clubhouse, to keep the money coming in, to avoid scandals, because no one wants to spend their entire career to get into the club and have to be ashamed of the fact that you are a member of the club, and to enjoy its privileges. So that's generally their human motivation. And none of that has anything to do with the gospel, but in particular, it's not directly contrary to the gospel either. So as long as those desires stay within bounds and are motivated by faith and virtue, they're tolerable in the church, and they can produce good decisions. Although, if you look at the number of popes who have been canonized, since the College of Cardinals got the exclusive right to elect the Pope, I think there's only been 2 or 3 canonized, where before there was something like 200. So it shows you that, well, maybe the College of Cardinals isn't good about choosing saints, okay? And just maybe, in case any cardinals are listening, I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm just saying that might be. And that's because in the conclaves, they come to compromises, and they choose one pope or the other. So a lot of people might blame or criticize Ratzinger for being the pope, or for not being a strong pope, or not being the pope that they wanted him to be. I personally would have never chosen Joseph Ratzinger to be a pope. That's my opinion. I disagree with his theology on almost every point. But that's besides the point. He was elected pope, he was validly elected, and he became the successor of St. Peter, the vicar of Jesus Christ, the Bishop of Rome, the Patriarch of the West, the Primate of Italy, and all the other titles that come with it, servant of the servants of God. And so here now, as Catholics, we have to understand that we cannot speak of the Pope the way we speak of President Trump or Giuseppe Conte, the Prime Minister of Italy. The Pope is not a mere man. In virtue of his office, we cannot judge him in anything. As Pope Innocent III says, we can only judge him if he errs from the faith. That's always been the teaching of the Church. But we can't judge him in the sense of setting ourselves up as someone that determines whether he did the right thing or the wrong thing. Objectively speaking, we can't possibly know what's in the mind of God, what's in his intentions, all points of history. But also because his office as Pope is between him and Christ. Christ alone is his judge in his matters, and that's why even when they discuss the canonization of the Pope, they don't ever consider what he did as Pope, because the Pope, that is beyond the judgment of the Congregation of Saints. They don't discuss those questions. So here when we talk about Pope Benedict's renunciation, we can talk about lots of aspects of it. We have to understand that this text was read by the man who was the Pope. And we have to keep that in mind. It's not something we can dissect or look at it as if it was a memo from the White House or from Palazzo Chigi or whatever, here in Italy. So those are the first things to think. So the second thing, that's the first general thing. The other big mistake we have that is commonly had in Pope Benedict's renunciation is the fact it's called Pope Benedict's renunciation. Okay, I use that title because that's what everyone understands it to be. But that title is actually wrong, because a pope doesn't renounce, the man who is pope renounces. And the reason for that is that the pope is not elected. A man is elected to be pope. Okay, so before Joseph Ratzinger was elected, and before he accepted his election, he was just a cardinal. He was just Joseph Ratzinger, Monsignor Ratzinger, or Your Excellency, Your Eminence, Joseph Ratzinger, or Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, as might be called. He was a bishop. He was a man, and at that point he didn't even have any. He had Munus as being head of the congregation for the adoption of the faith. That's not. That's more like an office, not really a munus. So he really had no munus in the church at that point, although he had sacramental orders as bishop, and he held it, and he was prefect of the congregation. But once he said, "I accept my election," he received the Petrine munus, the office of the Vicar of Christ. So he became successive Peter and Bishop of Rome instantly, because he was already a bishop, but instantly from his canonical election, according to Pope John Paul II's Law Universi Dominici Gregis, which was published in 1996, and undoubtedly was written with the advice of Cardinal Ratzinger at the time. So it's not like Cardinal Ratzinger doesn't know what the papal law is. As for the Code of Canon Law in 83, Ratzinger was taken on into the Roman Curia by Pope John Paul II, I think in 82, and so I would imagine he also had a say about the Code of Canon Law. So in regard to the Pope, we don't presume he's ignorant, we don't presume he's incompetent, we don't presume he's evil, and we don't presume he's a heretic. He's presumed innocent before the law, like any man, but he's also presumed to be right in all his judgments. Okay, that's just presumption. The second presumption of the Pope is that unless he says otherwise, we assume he's acting as Pope. And the way we discern this is when he's acting as Pope, he will say, "We decide, we judge, we discern." He uses the first person plural, which is the royal we, because he is the sovereign of the Vatican City, but he's also the Roman Pontiff, Christ's Vicar on earth. So he uses the royal we. But if he says, "I say this, I do this, I that," then the presumption is it's just the person speaking, the man. And just as the man becomes the Pope by accepting the office, uniting the office with himself, so to give up being Pope, if you other than dying, you have to separate the office from yourself, and therefore you must have to renounce it, push it back, okay? Say no to it, okay? And so obviously the one acting is the one rejecting, okay? So the one rejecting is not the Pope. The Pope can't reject being Pope because the Pope is he who has the office. But the man who is the Pope can reject the office. And therefore he has to, in the person of I, say, "I renounce," okay? A lot of this is not obvious because in the canon on papal renunciation speaks of the Roman Pontiff renouncing, because the canon law speaks in canonical language and identifies the man who is Pope according to the dignity of his ecclesiastic office. So you have to understand that when you're reading canon law. Canon law could have said more accurately, "if the man who is Pope decides to," okay, but it didn't. It doesn't say that, and but that's what it means, okay. And Pope Benedict understands that correctly because in his declaration, we'll see, he said, "I." Matter of fact, throughout the entire document, he's saying "I" until the very end where he says "we," when he promulgates the statement. Second of all, the statement he read is not entitled a renunciation. It's entitled a declaration. And this is very significant. Pope Benedict could have called it anything. He could have called it the renunciation of Pope Benedict. He didn't call it that. He called it the Declaration of February 11th, 2013. That's what it's called, the Declaratio, which is Latin meaning a declaration. We have the same meaning in English. Our language thankfully preserves the correct meaning of that Latin word. And it means a proclamation about something. De means about. And acclamation is a shouting out, an announcing. So he's announcing something about something. That's what declaratio means. And those set the big categories. The thing is once a man accepts the office as Pope in a canonical election, he is validly the Pope, and no one has the right to say he's not, unless they could find that he wasn't validly elected Pope, okay? But having proved or demonstrated that he is validly elected, you cannot doubt that he's the Pope, unless, of course, he becomes a heretic or renounces the Catholic religion or something like that. This applies also to the question of renunciation. we don't ever presume the Pope is not the Pope. If if in some hypothetical or future world you're dining with the Pope and he finds the soup at the table very distasteful and he says, "I wish I was no longer Pope," you don't leave lunch with him and say he's no longer Pope because he said, "I wish I was no longer Pope." Okay? And the reason why we act this way with anyone holding an office is the cessation of power or right is never presumed. This is a general principle of law in all codes of law, because if you don't assume this principle, you have chaos. And what does this principle mean is the presumption is the person with authority still has authority. That means you cannot say he no longer has the authority unless you have some fact or evidence to prove it conclusively. Okay? So here we have someone with an office, and here we have someone claiming he no longer has the office. Okay? This guy and all the people who claim he holds the office as don't have to prove that he holds the office. Okay? But it's this guy and all his followers who claim he no longer holds it. They have to prove it. Okay? So this is true about anyone holding an office who has been validly appointed or nominated or elected. And this is the general rule. So anyone in the church, if there's anyone at all, and there are, I'm one of them, who thinks that Benedict XVI is the Pope, doesn't have to prove it. I don't have to prove that. Because everyone admits he was canonically elected to the papacy. Those who say he's no longer Pope, they have to prove it. Okay? So it's kind of ridiculous that someone like me is here doing a documentary on the renunciation, because I don't have to prove it. But the reason I'm doing it is they won't prove it. They keep insisting for 7 years that Benedict validly resigned, but they have never once proven it. They have never once done the canonical demonstration of the fact. And at the most, you will get some essay, and at the beginning, and basically, if you take out all the unnecessary language, it says, "I insist he's no longer the Pope," or it's evident that he's not, but they never give an argument. So anyone from a calm, rational point of view would say, wait a moment here. They're claiming he no longer has the office, but they won't prove it. But that violates the general principle law. If someone holds an office, he doesn't have to prove he still holds it. It's those who claim he no longer does who have to prove it. And that should end the whole argument right there. Right on that point alone, all the cardinals, bishops, and priests, all the deacons, all the religious, and all the laity of the church should say, well, it's obviously Pope Benedict's still the Pope until someone can prove he's not. Okay? And we'll discuss in the next episode, what does it mean not to be the Pope and how do you prove that? But I think I've discussed enough in this first episode laying out the general rules of reality. My name is Brother Alexis Spagnola. I'm editor of FromRome.info. And if you go to the top of the page of that website, an index to Pope Benedict's renunciation is more than 50 or 60 articles that I and others have written that are linked in that article that discuss all aspects of this topic. Thank you so much for listening. And please subscribe to this channel, From Rome Info Video. As soon as I get 1,000 subscribers, I'll start being able to do everything live on YouTube and not recorded. And that makes things a lot easier and maybe enable me to produce a lot more informational videos here from the city of Rome in Italy. Thank you, God bless, and have a blessed Easter.